Welcome to Standard Jobs in Asset-Wise Performance Management. By the end of this unit, you will know what a standard job is, standard job naming conventions, how to define a standard job, how to add tasks to a standard job, and how to define triggering rules for the job. A standard job is a collection of standard tasks. For example, a standard job for a vehicle could include standard tasks such as changing the oil, inspecting the brakes, and rotating the tires. The purpose of a standard job is to group standard tasks to simplify the creation of work orders. When a standard job is used to create a work order, APM uses the job standard tasks to create the work order tasks. A standard job can be based on a job template or created from scratch. When based on a template, the job's list of tasks originates with the list of tasks on the job template. To begin, let's look at standard job naming conventions. By using a standard naming convention for jobs and job templates, you can easily filter and sort the job in tables. It is recommended that the standard job and standard tasks that are included in the job have the same name. For corrective jobs, start with the task action from the standard task that you will apply to the standard job. Then describe the component on which the action is being taken. For example, replace lube oil system oil filter. For scheduled restoration or discard jobs, do the same thing, starting with the task action and then describing the component on which the action is being taken. For example, restoration, repack coupling, or discard, replace lube oil cooler. For an inspection, start with route, followed by area, frequency, trade, shift, operating state, PDM technology, if it is other than visual inspection, and maintenance group if one is required. For example, route, water treatment, daily, operator, nights, running normally, utilities. If the title case is used, you may want to eliminate commas to save space. Let's create a standard job, beginning with a header. First, navigate to the Reliability Program view. Click the Programs tab and then the Jobs tab. In the lower right corner of the window, select New and then From Scratch. A new standard job window appears. The job number is automatically assigned. It can be changed if necessary, but the number must be unique. Enter a title for the new job. Follow the naming convention as discussed earlier. I'll enter route, monthly, mechanic, days, running normally, visual inspection. Enter the asset number you want to write this job against. If you don't know the number, click the Browse icon beside Asset. From the Asset selector that opens, you can expand the hierarchy to browse for the asset. Click OK when the asset is located. The selector closes and the asset is added to the standard job. On the Details tab, select a planner from the drop-down list. Select a work type. Make sure that the work type is correct for the type of work being performed for the standard job. Here, On Condition will be used. Select a work classification if it is known. This is used for grouping work orders, for filtering and sorting. Once a work type is selected for a job, only classifications for that work type are available for selection. To aid in the grouping and searching of work orders, you can enter the following criteria: frequency, trade, operating condition of the asset at the time the work is performed, maintenance group, PDM technology. Here I will select Visual Audible Inspection. This completes creating the standard job header. Now we'll add a standard task to the standard job. From the standard job, navigate to the Tasks tab. You can click New to create a new standard task or browse for one or more existing standard tasks. The New button limits you to adding one task at a time. You can browse and select multiple tasks using the filters on the Browse Task dialog. Select the task you want and click OK. The standard task is now added to the standard job. Job triggering rules tell APM when to create work orders from a standard job or preventive maintenance routine. It is possible to create a triggering rule for each standard job or PM route. Triggering rules are added to a standard job so that work orders can be triggered automatically. You can manually trigger a standard job to create work orders at any time. However, if the standard job has an open work order that was automatically triggered based on an indicator, it cannot be manually triggered again. You can set a range of dates for triggering a work order from a standard job. For example, you may have jobs that are performed at a specific time of year. Work orders will only be created during the specified period. This is called seasonal triggering. Triggering conditions can be based on a time-based frequency, such as every 30 days, a cumulative measure, such as every 2,000 miles, or when a vehicle reaches 50,000 miles, or the asset's operating condition, such as when the temperature exceeds 100 degrees or when the pressure is less than 10 psi. It is possible to create rules using a combination of conditions. For example, you might define a triggering rule for a standard job that will trigger every 30 days or every 2,000 miles. Time-based triggers can be based on calendar days or in-operation days. If you base a rule on in-operation days, APM tracks the status of the asset and the number of days that the asset had a non-operating status. Only those days that the asset had an operational status are considered for the triggering rule. For example, if the rule says to trigger on the job every 30 days, but the asset was non-operational for 5 days during the 30-day period, the job will be triggered after 35 calendar days. You add the conditions to the triggering rule using a rule clause. A rule to trigger every 30 days or every 2,000 miles uses two rule clauses, every 30 days or every 2,000 miles. When one of the clauses is true, the work order is generated from the standard job. You must indicate the relationship between the rule clauses on the triggering rule. You can join several clauses together using the AND or the OR operator. You cannot enter brackets around the clauses. Instead, APM supports brackets implicitly. Whenever you use an OR operator, the software treats what precedes it and what follows it as though they were within brackets. For example, a triggering rule that states that Clause 1 and Clause 2 or Clause 3 and Clause 4 would be treated as though it included the following brackets: bracket Clause 1 and Clause 2 end bracket, or bracket Clause 3 and Clause 4 end bracket. Once you have entered the clauses for the triggering rule, APM converts the clauses into words using a triggering rule description. If the rule includes more than one clause that requires data from indicator readings, it will evaluate the rule as true when the most recent readings meet the conditions in the clauses. Meter-based triggers use indicators to collect cumulative readings. Indicator-based triggering rules use these readings to dictate when a standard job should trigger based on the indicator readings. Note that the work order is created when two conditions exist. The rule is true, and there is no open work order for the job. Condition-based triggers are based on an indicator's readings. A work order is created when the indicator reading meets the criteria set in the rule. This is true only if there is no open work order for the job. The indicator must be set back to normal, or another work order will be triggered. An exception rule allows you to create a rule that is in exception to the triggering rule that you have created. This may be for triggering the job on a specific date or based on an indicator's particular value. You can also create rules to suspend standard jobs. You may suspend a standard job, for example, when you have a blast furnace or other piece of equipment that is being shut down for an extended period of time. To prevent PM work orders from being generated during this time, suspend the job for the required period. You can enter the dates for when the job suspension should be automatically released, or you can release the job manually. When setting up a time or meter-based triggering rule, an early warning can be added. Every time that APM evaluates a triggering rule for a standard job, it checks if the job falls under an early warning condition. If it does, APM flags it so that you can see that the job will be triggered soon. Planners can review the early warning flags on their jobs to get a preview of work that is coming up. This provides the ability to generate planned work with longer material or labor lead times that is due after the horizon date of the standard job. An example of an early warning is a rule that is to be triggered every 3 months, but with an early warning of 5 days in advance. Another example is a rule that is triggered every 5,000 miles, but with an early warning of 500 miles in advance. Now, let's create a triggering rule for our standard job. With the standard job open, click the Triggering tab. Click New. A new Rule Clause dialog opens. You can choose between a time-based trigger and one that is based on an asset indicator. Here, a time-based trigger rule would be created. When creating a time-based trigger, you need to define the time-based rule detail. With a time-based rule, you can set it to trigger at a defined interval, such as every 30 days, either on the calendar or in operation. You could trigger it for a shutdown or trigger it for a specific date and time. You can also provide an early warning. Note the triggering interval. You may select either variable or fixed. A variable interval will generate the next work order based on the completion date of the current work order. A fixed interval will generate work orders based on the expected start date of the current work order. For example, if you have a work order that is generated on the first of the month and the interval is every 1 month, a fixed interval will cause the next work order to be generated on the first of the next month. However, if you complete the same work order on the 5th of the month and you have selected variable, the next work order will generate on the 5th of the following month. Click OK to accept the rule. Notice that the rule has been converted to an easily read format. A second rule will now be created using an indicator rule. To create an asset indicator rule, click the radio button beside Asset Indicator. Then select the asset that the indicator resides on. Select the indicator to use for the rule. Next, select the operator to use for the condition of the indicator. Select the indicator state on which to trigger the rule. The rule now states, create work order when the indicator condition of the fork slides on asset 931 is either greater than or equal to a warning state. Finally, define the relationship of this new clause to the preceding clause. This is needed as this is the second rule built for triggering the standard job. Select either the AND or the OR clause. If the AND condition is selected, the job will trigger every 30 days based on the first clause, and the indicator's state rule created here are both true. The OR clause will cause the trigger to occur when the time-based rule from the first clause or when the indicator warning state from the second clause are true. Click OK to accept the rule. Notice that the triggering language at the top has now changed to include both rules. Save and close the standard job. As we have seen, standard jobs are set to trigger work orders at certain times or when certain indicator readings are collected. Many of these jobs contain preventive maintenance or PM tasks for your assets. Using APM, you can create PM work orders from jobs before they are actually triggered. This gives you time to plan and schedule them. Jobs can be triggered from the site's Tools menu, Reliability Program Options, Generate PM Work Orders. A Trigger Standard Job dialog opens. You can generate work orders that are coming due within a horizon date, that are planned for a shutdown period, or are based on a PM generation profile. With these parameters, you can also specify the asset type, maintenance group, work type, or work classification of jobs that are to be triggered. In summary, we have learned what a standard job is, how to define and create a standard job, how to add standard tasks and indicators to a standard job, and how to define triggering rules for the standard job. For more information on this topic and related topics, please refer to the on-demand videos in the Learn server or refer to the APM online help. Thank you for watching.